What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, September 18th, 2017, start of a brand new week. Getting close to the end of the month, getting close to the official end of summer. It's the next few days here, although we are already getting snow in some parts of the country here. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And obviously, one of the big news stories that we've seen all over the corporate media are these protests going on in St. Louis, where everybody is just out there rioting and Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and they're just screaming that this police officer was acquitted of first-degree murder in the shooting death of a black suspect. And everybody's out there saying, see, it proves we're a racist nation. It proves we're a racist nation. It proves nothing of the kind. Think back to all those photos you saw from the hurricanes, in which you saw people of all colors helping each other get through that disaster. It absolutely yanks the rug out from under this idea that we have a racial violence problem in this country, despite all the money being spent to hire these protesters to go on out and cause trouble. This has gone on for 3 days there in St. Louis. And it's interesting, looking at the corporate media, they never mention the circumstances of this case itself. Now, here is what actually happened. Police officer Stokely and his partner saw Anthony Lamar Smith engaged in a drug deal. Smith then spotted the police and he backed his car into the police car twice. This was recorded on the police car's dash cam. Smith then sped off with Stokely and his partner giving chase. Now, after Smith's car was stopped, Stokely and his partner, Brian Bianchi, approached Smith's vehicles. Witnesses testified, and the dash cam footage showed that Stokely yelled at Smith through the driver's side window to open the door and get out. Smith did not. He did not comply and was on the dash cam. The window and shot 5 times, killing Smith. And a handgun was found in Smith's vehicle between the driver's seat and the center console. Now, I'm not a big fan of the police violence, but in this case, as near as I can tell, Stokely was justified. This is not a case of a white officer killing an innocent black man, but of a police officer shooting a criminal who clearly was resisting arrest, possibly with lethal force. But the corporate media isn't mentioning that. They're just pushing that white police officer, black victim, white police officer, black victim. That's all you need to think about. Start throwing rocks and bottles and everything like that. Still trying to gin up race riots in this country as a pretext for a declaration of national emergency and martial law. And anybody who understands the circumstances that led up to this police officer being acquitted in this case, it was clearly justifiable in the line of duty, and it's just making Antifa and Black Lives Matter look worse when you realize there's a non-issue there. We're not talking about some white officer who just walked up and for the fun of it drew down on a black guy just standing there on the street. That's not what happened. There was a crime in progress. The criminal fled. The criminal resisted arrest. The criminal had a gun. End of story. And what we're seeing with the spin being put onto this event is part of a larger picture that we're seeing over at Breitbart.com, where Dinesh D'Souza is out there saying the left isn't just tearing down history with all these monuments and everything else they're trying to tear down. They're trying to rewrite it. They're not merely taking down history. They're trying to promote their own very selective rewriting of history. And reminds me of that quote from George Orwell's 1984. Those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future. There it is. They're trying to rewrite the nation of this history to suit some political agenda, to demonize white people. It's amazing here. Now then, as you know, Jeff Sessions has ramped up his war against leakers. And so what we now see happening is the New York Slimes has published a story targeting Jeff Sessions from an anonymous leaked source. And basically, the leaked document is an attempt to strike back with a story to humiliate the Attorney General. Unnamed current and former administration officials told the New York Times supposed details from an Oval Office meeting months ago, where the president allegedly dressed Sessions down after getting word Robert Mueller was to be appointed the special counsel. Now, knowing the conflict of interest relationship between James Comey and Robert Mueller, I think Attorney General Sessions deserved a good dressing down. That was absolutely the wrong person to name as a special counsel. And the president, being the boss, has a right to say, you made a bad call. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're starting with the domestic news, then we'll get into the wars and all the rest. A lot of stuff going on here today. Now, as you know, Representative Dana Rohrabacher met with Julian Assange, and apparently has a portable hard drive of information that would absolutely disprove this story that Russia hacked the DNC servers. And early reports were that Rohrabacher was going to have a meeting with Obama to share it with them. Apparently that has not happened. And apparently General Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff, is working to block Rohrabacher's access to the president. Doesn't want the president to know that there's doubt about that hacking story. So what we have here is a president who's being literally blinded, rendered deaf, dumb, and blind by his own staff. They're corralling him, they're filtering the information. We know they're lying to him, and they're preventing information the president needs to have from reaching him. And that is not what the job of the White House staff is supposed to be. They're supposed to be there working for the president to make sure he has the information he needs to make a good decision, rather than filtering propaganda through him to steer him in a pre-chosen direction. And that seems to be the reason why Trump has just backtracked on so many of his campaign promises, in particular the war agenda. He was told by the head of the CIA that there was absolute incontrovertible evidence that Assad gassed his own people at Idlib, and that's what triggered the cruise missile attack into the Syrian airbase. But the story never made any sense, and there's no proof of it. So we have the CIA lying to the president to control the president and force his hand on certain decisions. That's a dangerous, dangerous situation. Donald Trump is like a basketball up in the air, and his staff or all the players around him trying to tip the ball one way or the other. It's a very unstable system, and really horrendous mistakes can result. Now, as you know, James O'Keefe has done a lot of good work with his Project Veritas, and all of a sudden, he is being hit with all of these frivolous lawsuits, and his lawyers are saying these are completely frivolous, but they are going to cost him money. It's lawfare. And these lawsuits are all coming in from the people who were caught on these videotapes saying these very damaging things. And they're trying to say that this is defamatory and libel, and that Veritas has to issue an apology for making these statements about these people. And as James O'Keefe points out, Veritas did not say anything about these people. They merely showed the tapes in which these people said these things themselves. And that's why Veritas lawyers are saying these are frivolous lawsuits. They're never going to get through court. It's just being done to try and bankrupt Project Veritas through lawfare. And it's backfiring because donations are piling on in. Now, getting on to the storm damage, thousands have been left homeless from the hurricanes, and Trump sends another $75 million to Israel. Now, Hurricane Maria is approaching the Caribbean as a major storm. It seems to be following pretty much the same track that Irma did. Hurricane Jose is just brushing the mid-Atlantic coast. There are tropical storm warnings along Massachusetts, New Jersey, that whole area. But the eye of the storm, the major part of the storm, is well out to the Atlantic, and that's really good news. A couple of other storms out there. We're still going to wait and see where they're going. We have a couple of storms forming up here in the Pacific. Two of them, we know they're not going to come anywhere near Hawaii. The third one, still up in the air. Now, getting on to the war zones, Nikki Haley is up there at the United Nations just in a full-on meltdown. And there must be something about being named U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations that brings out the inner mass murderer in people. Remember when Madeleine Albright famously admitted that she thought 500,000 dead Iraqi children due to U.S. sanctions was worth it? John Bolton never met a disagreement he didn't want to turn into a war. Samantha Power barked about human rights while her administration's drones were snuffing out human life in unprecedented numbers. And the real butcher of the Balkans, Richard Holbrooke, sold the Yugoslavia war on lies. Negroponte sold a lie that Saddam Hussein needed to be killed and his country destroyed for democracy to flourish. And so now you have Nikki Haley out there saying Assad must go, and if the United Nations won't get behind it, we'll do it unilaterally. They're still back to that thing. They don't want to admit they've lost in Syria. And they don't have a legitimate reason to go back in there. But this war is all but over. The lifting of the blockade on Deir ez-Zor is the beginning of the end of Syria's war. And the Syrian army is driving the Islamic State out of villages on the eastern shore of the Euphrates River, and they have started crossing the Euphrates River at the key city of Jafra. And they're just making headways. There are even pictures of the Syrian army crossing over there. So now we have reports that U.S. forces are starting to retreat from the Al-Zakaf in Syria's Badia desert region. They're pulling on out of there. But things are really moving over there. It's a dynamic situation. Russia, Iran, and Turkey have agreed on the final de-escalation zone in Idlib, Syria. Meanwhile, the Russian Ministry of Defense is denying Pentagon allegations that it hit U.S.-backed rebels in Syria. And again, the U.S.-backed rebels are enemy combatants of the government of Syria. Doesn't matter that the U.S. is backing them or not. Meanwhile, the U.S. is admitting that, yes, they did a strike on Deir ez-Zor that killed civilians, and we promise we'll have a really thorough investigation of what happened there. Now, the really alarming story here right now is that the U.S. has just unilaterally declared a no-fly zone north of the Euphrates River. They don't want the Russian aviation in there. They don't want the Syrian aviation in there. And the United States has no legal basis to declare a no-fly zone over other people's territory. And this could lead to a confrontation between Syrian and Russian aviation and the U.S., and the war will be on, and Washington, D.C. will be so happy. Story coming out of RINF.com, something we've all known a long time. The CIA and its ally, Al-Qaeda. And Edward Snowden brought out a lot of this information about how the CIA is connected to Al-Qaeda, supports Al-Qaeda, supplies Al-Qaeda. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Steve in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, mainly just a comment. I notice at least every other day or so that the president of North Korea launches a missile, and I know he's using this to send a message that he will not be invaded. It's just it's a deterrent because they don't have a nuclear weapon. But I think he's falling into this trap of he's actually fueling the warmongers here in the United States to say we need to take action, and of course he doesn't have the capabilities to even do a strike on us. That it's just not going to happen. He knows that would be devastating. That would be the end of North Korea.
North Korea. Now, if you get past all the mistranslations, North Korea has never said anything about wanting to attack the U.S. or Japan or Guam or anything. They have made it very, very clear. They are building up their nuclear arsenal to prevent the United States from invading them because they have a very clear memory of how terrible it was the last time the United States invaded their territory, and they don't want to go through that again, and frankly, who can blame them?
No, I totally agree. I just wish he would emphasize that and just say, forget the missile testing right now. Just say, just keep repeating that over and over and over again, that North Korea does not want to war with anybody. we do not want to be invaded like Iraq was, and just keep stressing that point, repeating it over and over. And
Steve, they are stressing it. The American corporate media will never report that. The American corporate media is lying about Kim Jong-un the same way they lied about Saddam Hussein, the same way they lied about Ahmadinejad. Remember when they said he was going to wipe Israel off the map, and it turned out that wasn't what he said at all. We're all getting these engineered translations of what Kim Jong-un is saying, and there's always the possibility of deception. Have you ever heard of this organization called MEMRI, M-E-M-R-I? The Middle East Media Research Institute, and it is an organization that provides free translations of Arabic media to Western corporate media. It's also an Israeli propaganda front, and they have been caught with mistranslation after mistranslation after mistranslation, always to make the Muslim world look bad and the Western world look good, and to justify invasion and war. We don't really know for certainty what Kim Jong-un is saying or thinking. We're being presented with an image of a dangerous, out-of-control maniac who must be stopped, but that was exactly the same image they were projecting of Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, and everybody else that's head of a country they want to invade will get the same treatment in the media. Oh, he's a dangerous maniac. He's destabilizing the world. And yet, go back and look at the nation that's actually doing the destabilization. Invasion, drone strike, regime change, invasion, drone strike, regime change. It is the United States of America that is the out-of-control, insane power right now.
All right. Hey, well, thank you for that little bit of information. I'll look that up, that website. It's good.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
We're going to let you go here. Now then, the U.S. up in Kabul is planning to expand their green zone. And apparently there's been a little bit of nervousness because some of the people who work inside the green zone live outside it, and they literally have to be flown by helicopter to and from the embassy. And so what they're going to do is they're now going to expand the green zone all around the residential areas. And what they're signaling is the United States has no intention of ever leaving Afghanistan. It's a permanent garrison. It's a Roman legion, if you will, an occupying force. Now, over in Iraq, their Vice President, Nouri al-Maliki, is denouncing the planned Kurdish independence referendum in northern Iraq, viewing it as the establishment of a second Israel, and saying they will not allow that. And we already know that Israel's fully on board with the establishment of the Kurdistan. Israelis of Kurdish descent have already started moving there. Meanwhile, Turkey is massing their troops in armored vehicles along their border with Syria to prevent the new Kurdistan from seizing part of their territory. Now, as you know, Israel is out there with their little cheerleader skirt and their pom-poms saying, invade Iran, invade Iran, invade Iran. And Donald Trump is trying to come up with a reason to dump the P5+1 deal unilaterally, to just break another treaty the United States has made. And the big problem is that the IAEA has gone on into Iran yet again, inspected all of the nuclear sites, and confirmed once again Iran is playing by the rules. Well, in response to that, Israel is now claiming that they gave the IAEA intel on secret Iran nuclear sites that were not included in the P5+1. See, the P5+1, they weren't complete. They wouldn't listen to us about these other nuclear sites, and we know bad things are going on over there. Basically, Netanyahu is trying to undermine and discredit the IAEA to give Donald Trump room to void the P5+1 deal and launch a war. But the IAEA may have ignored the Israeli claims given the fact that Israel's claims that led to the bombing of the Iraq power station at Osirak turned out to be false, as well as all of Israel's earlier claims stretching back 30 years that Iran was weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Let's take a phone call from Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing fine.
Hey, I guess nobody's ever going to learn not to believe anything that comes out of the TV when it comes to these issues that have possible war outcomes. We don't even know if Kim Jong-un is even saying anything.
No, we don't. We don't really.
I mean, we're just taking for granted that they're telling us the truth, and he's threatening us. And he's just, these rockets that he has probably couldn't get a 100-pound bag of potatoes 20 miles in the air. So there's no way they're going to have there's not going to be any combat from their end. Now, if we do anything, you can bet the whole world is going to come down on us like a ton of bricks. We're not going to start nothing. This is just going to be more talk. We'll be talking about this time next year. There's no way they're going to trigger a war with North Korea. If they do, it would be.
I hope you are right. I hope you are right. I really do. But the fact of the matter is that North Korea has demonstrated a considerable capability of getting their missiles to hit their targets. Whether or not they really have achieved a deployable nuclear warhead or not, I think that's up in the air. Frankly, that one photo looked more like a movie prop than a real warhead to me, not that I'm really an expert on nuclear weapons. Both sides are bluffing and blustering and thumping on their chests, and that's what makes the situation very difficult.
Okay. I got one question.
Hang on.
I got one question.
Before the question, I want to make a point. North Korea does have some very long-range rockets like the Taepodong 2 that can reach the United States of America. But again, North Korea keeps saying over and over again, they don't want to get into a war with other people. They don't want to attack Japan. They don't want to attack Guam. What they want is to deter aggression by outsiders, and that is the reason for any country to have a nuclear arsenal. Nobody's going to just haul off and use a nuclear weapon and throw away that deterrent without a very, very good reason. And remember, the only nation that's ever actually used nuclear weapons against another country is the United States. And they only did so in the sure and certain knowledge that nobody was going to fling a nuclear bomb back at them.
Okay. Now the question I have is, Mike, where are they storing the fuel on these rockets to make it all the way over here to the United States? And what kind of guidance system are they using? Are they using satellite communication? Are they using gyroscopes that the primitive Germans used during World War II? I mean, this technology is so far out of their reach, in my opinion. It's propaganda. I mean, it takes 12 hours to fly to Korea from Las Vegas. So where are they putting the fuel? How does a rocket hold that much fuel to make it to the United States? It's impossible.
Well, no, I disagree. I mean, we certainly know other countries have made rockets that are able to cover half the globe. And when you're talking about 12 hours to fly from Las Vegas to North Korea, you're talking about carrying a very heavy payload. A nuclear missile, it only has to carry that nuclear warhead. And that makes it...
No, but it's all relative to the size. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I just think what we have here... Okay.
Okay. No.
I just think what we have here is a dumbed down America that believes this stuff. I think if you talk to a real engineer, that they would tell you that it's absolutely impossible.
Well, let me go on back and remind you that I have a little bit of experience with this kind of stuff going back to my NASA days. And again, we've seen these demonstrations of the rockets that North Korea is putting on out there, and apparently they have started moving from liquid-fueled rockets to solid-fueled rockets, which means a faster reaction time. The Taepodong 2, as I recall, and I may be wrong on this, but it's liquid-fueled, which means it takes a long time to get it ready to go to fly. With a solid-fueled rocket, it's basically hit the switch and go. And if they can achieve a very lightweight nuclear warhead, then yes, they're within hand's reach of being able to have that nuclear deterrent. Once they actually have it, I think we're going to see all this nonsense and posturing against North Korea just go away. They'll have some of the distraction will be over in Ukraine or something like that. But right now, it's a game of brinksmanship between the United States and North Korea, and neither side is backing down, and yet neither side is daring to actually take an overt step, which let's hope that situation maintains itself. But again, North Korea, you keep trying to cut me off. What is it you want to say?
Well, are there any Google Earth pictures of their nuclear reactor?
Yeah.
You have to have a nuclear reactor to enrich U-235 to get it into a critical mass.
Yeah, you can see North Korea's nuclear facilities on Google Earth. I've already done it. Anyway, we have to let you go. Okay. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, in response to Rick from Arizona, I know a lot of us would like to believe that this is all fairy tale and bluff and propaganda, and there really isn't a risk or a danger out there. but unfortunately that's not being real world. What we know is a fairy tale and a fantasy is who the aggressor is, because the American corporate media and the government are out there trying to convince you that the entire world is ready to aggress against us unless we preemptively bomb them back to the Stone Age. Now, regarding the dynamics of an ICBM, it is true that Rick's flight from Las Vegas to North Korea uses a lot of fuel because it's using fuel all the way during the flight. Same thing with a cruise missile, using fuel all the way during the flight, air-to-air missiles and things like that. ICBMs operate a little bit differently because they only need enough fuel to get them through what is called the boost phase. That's when they're accelerating from the ground up onto their trajectory. And then after that, they don't need any more fuel. They're coasting the rest of the way. Physics, gravity are driving that rocket to its final destination. So it doesn't need as much fuel per pound of payload as you would need for more conventional air transport. Now, North Korea has developed missiles that do have a long range. North Korea is developing nuclear weapons. At the point where they plausibly have merged the two, everybody's going to back off. The reason that the United States makes such a big stink about anybody having nuclear weapons, whether it's Iran or Iraq or North Korea or whoever, is the United States wants the option of invading those countries at some point in the future. And once they obtain a nuclear deterrent, that option is off the table. So they lie about Iraq having nuclear weapons to go in and destroy the place. Israel is now trying to claim that the Aiea is ignoring secret Iranian nuclear sites because they want to go in and destroy the place. And now we're in this chest-thumping phase with North Korea because the issue is the United States retaining the option to invade and conquer countries whenever it feels like it wants to. Now, how do North Korea's missiles work? I don't really know. But I do know that a lot of the technology that would be needed to make a ballistic missile is now available off the shelf. And don't forget, back during the Clinton years, where there was that whole Loral scandal, where a lot of guidance and missile technology wound up being sent over to China. Some of that may have gotten to Korea through espionage. We don't really know. I mean, the fact of the matter is that your little gyros on your iPhone are actually more accurate than the ones that they sent to the moon with Apollo. Look at how sophisticated those little drones are. They keep themselves level. When you're flying a drone, you're not really flying the drone. The drone flies itself. All that control you have tells it is where you want it to go, and it handles the rest. And it's amazing, the technology that's in there. So we'd all like to believe that it's all a fairy tale, that North Korea is obtaining a deterrent, but they do seem to be within reach of it, or the United States wouldn't be in such a panic about it. All right, let's take a few more phone calls. Steve in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha, brother. We certainly love your show all the time. It's the first thing I always listen to it during the afternoon.
Thank you.
The reason I called is because I get this rag called Rolling Stone magazine. I have no interest in the music scene and everything, but a long-time friend of ours gives us a Christmas present and a subscription to this every year. And the reason I'm calling you is because in the issue that just came out for September 21st, there is a big article in it that says the siege of Raqqa, R-A-Q-Q-A,
yes,
on the front lines of America's secret war with ISIS. And I know you just said that American troops aren't even in Syria anymore, but this article...
No. That's not what I said. No, what I reported was they've abandoned one of the positions they had in the desert. I did not say that they have left Syria completely. They ought to. They don't have any...
Okay.
There's no legal reason for them to be there.
Well, this article says there are some 14 U.S. bases on Syrian soil, but the American government won't say exactly how many troops and where they're located. And it shows a picture of this bombed-out city that they say is Raqqa, and they describe some really intense fighting where the U.S. is allied with the, what's the name of that group that's against Turkey also? And
ISIS,
they're working
Daesh.
together.
Yeah.
They were done by Hillary Clinton, you say?
Yes, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, they were smuggling arms from the conquest of Libya over to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, and that consulate at Benghazi was the hub of the gun-running operation. And so,
Yeah.
Of course, the paper records were all destroyed in that attack.
Well, according to this, we're still going to be fighting in Syria just to try to get rid of ISIS. I think didn't you say that we are really supporting ISIS?
We're using ISIS against Assad. I mean, and again, Nikki Haley up at the United Nations is already out there, admitting the U.S. agenda is to get rid of Assad. And I think the United States presence in Syria and, for that matter, Afghanistan is more a matter of appearing to not have lost those wars. They certainly have not won them. But as long as they pour material and our kids into these war zones, they can stand up and say, well, we haven't lost yet. There's still hope for the future. Because the first time the United States suffers a serious defeat in any of these countries, it's going to yank the rug out of the rest of this whole, global domination agenda.
Yeah, I was hoping we'd have a little bit better situation when Mr. Trump got elected, but
me too.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed in him on that. On the other hand, it does seem like he's been completely cocooned, and his entire view of the world right now is being filtered and colored by those around him. And by the way, with regard to Rolling Stone, they have one writer over there, Matt Taibbi. You need to pay attention to what he writes, because he writes great stuff. In fact, he goes. He definitely
cancel the subscription, but I do like to read his stuff.
Yeah, because he'll actually report on things the American corporate media won't dare touch.
That's correct. So you can get a copy of the issue and see it for yourself. What they're talking about, RAQA, RAQQA. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation.
It's pronounced Raqqa.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for taking my call, mister.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. I dream of the day I have my photo on the cover of Rolling Stones. I always loved that song. All righty. Back to the phones. Joe in New Jersey. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Aloha, Mike.
Aloha.
I'm probably 10 or 15 years older than you. But it may not be relative now since the latest conversation as the program has evolved. But getting back to the news, I recall when I was a kid growing up in New Jersey, my dad and mom used to bundle all us kids up in the car and travel 6 or 14 hours to the Appalachian Mountains to West Virginia to visit my grandmother, my mother's side. And there'd be nothing to do there. And I would sit in the living room with my grandfather, and I would turn the radio on, and the news would be the form of the corn products harvest and whose pig won a blue ribbon this week.
Oh, I remember those days. That was back when radio stations really were local community assets. They weren't networked together, and it was all national news and stuff. And I had the same thing in that town I was growing up in, New Hampshire. There was a small AM broadcaster in the same county, and 90% of what they were talking about was what was going on in the county. Whose barn burned down, and who had vandalized whose mailbox and stuff like that, and definitely made it much more interesting.
Incredible how things have evolved.
Well, I'm not sure. Incredible is the word I would use always, but yeah, with all of this consolidation of media, very often the local news gets relegated to almost like it's just not. You're being given the message that what you are doing in your local community is just really much less important to you than what's happening on the grand global stage.
There you go. Hey, Mike, you got a fabulous show.
Thank you.
And I tell everybody that I run into, I run a little car service business. They gotta plug into WRH.com.
Okay, it's not.
This is where it's at.
It's not WRH.com. That goes to the Western Regional Hospital. I tried to get it. I couldn't get it. It's whatreallyhappened.com. You have to spell it out. I'm sorry. That's the way it is.
Oh, thank you.
I bet that hospital is saying, wow, look at all this traffic we're getting on our website.
Jesus Christ. All right,
okay.
Mike, you have a great day and continue the good work.
I will do my best. Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to James in Atlanta. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I had two questions about Argentina. I wanted to ask you, the guy that called two callers back that doubted North Korea's missiles, he sounded a lot like Bill Deagle. Did it sound like Bill to you?
No, he didn't.
Maybe I just almost sound like Bill. But Argentina, I watched a documentary that they were real prosperous at one time, and then all their debt were not extended, and they had hyperinflation. Can you tell me much about what caused that?
Well, yeah, this actually goes all the way back, for decades of U.S. intervention in South America. It goes all the way back to the Cold War, where a lot of these South American countries were socialist governments, and they were taking the wealth of the nation and spending it on the people, which strikes me as a good way to run a country. And so the U.S. started trying to intervene and project power. A lot of this came out of the Monroe Doctrine. Where the U.S. goal was to make the entire hemisphere just like the United States of America. And some of it was pretty direct, like the ouster of Allende and imposing the dictator Pinochet on Chile. But one of the things the United States did was they used the American banks as tools of foreign policy, in which they would go down to these countries in South America and offer them very generous loans at low rates, to allow them to build up their businesses and their infrastructure, and these South American countries would agree to these loans, and very often there were bribes paid to the leadership to put this thing through. And then what would happen is the CIA would go into those countries and start carrying out economic sabotage, crop destroying, sabotage of facilities, in order that these South American countries couldn't repay those loans. And that's what put these countries into debt, and along with that debt came strings from Washington, D.C. on how they should run their countries. And it's even referred to obliquely in the movie The Good Shepherd, where they talk about the CIA deliberately dropping these pests on these coffee plantations in this country to destroy the coffee crop so that they can't sell it and make the money to pay back the loans. And that's how that all came about. So Argentina, all of those countries fell into that debt trap by the U.S. They've been trying to get on out, but as is always the practice with bankers, their agenda is to never let you get out of the debt, because once you're out of the debt, you're out of their control.
This documentary even said they had a Harrods department store. Did they have a lot of British people living there? Was Britain... I thought that was interesting.
Oh, yeah, they were very, very close for a while. And of course, then there were a lot of tensions. And, once the New World opened up, everybody was trying to establish partner relations with countries as they popped up all over there. So, yeah, there was a lot of British companies, a lot of American companies that were all over there.
And the war in the Falklands, what was all that about?
Well, there are differing opinions on it. Basically, it was a case of the Falkland Islands were obviously claimed by two different nations, and people look at the Falklands and say they really weren't worth fighting over. But apparently Thatcher decided that she needed to prove how tough she was as prime minister and launched that Falkland Islands War, which, you know, they managed to liberate a whole bunch of sheep and not much else.
Well, I'm going to research a little bit more. It was just an interesting thing that I saw about how much inflation they had and how things changed so fast. And this all happened in the late 80s. It wasn't like it was 100 years ago. This is something that happened recently.
Yeah, it did. They were very prosperous throughout most of their history. In fact, you look at most of the countries around the world right now. For most of their history, they've been comfortable. They've been prosperous. It's only over the last few decades of this economic hegemonic domination by the United States that these countries are being impoverished for the benefit of American corporations.
Thanks, Mike. Have a great day.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. Going to let you go. The phone lines are open now. Interestingly enough, there is a German minister who's come on out. Actually, it's many of them. Top German politicians are demanding the United States remove the nuclear weapons stationed within Germany, because in the event of a U.S.-Russian war, those nuclear assets would be a first strike target, and Germany doesn't want to go through that. And as a matter of fact, the anti-nuclear agenda may be intruding into the national elections. A lot of people are realizing that the U.S. is gunning for Russia one way or the other, and they're all trying to basically get to the sidelines and not look like a target to either side, knowing that in the aftermath of a U.S.-Russian nuclear exchange, they're going to be the new first world. And I'm hearing all this alarming talk about war with Russia. Newt Gingrich is out there saying Trump can attack Russia quickly and decisively. We can just do it whenever we want. Frankly, it sounds like a bluff to me. It really does. Bluff and bluster is the sense I get from this. More when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So as I said before the commercial break, I am really getting very angry at all this tough talk about Russia. And apparently there's this conference of the Yalta International Strategy in Kiev. And Newt Gingrich was up there basically saying that, yes, we can whip Russia anytime we want to. And he's predicting that Russia will withdraw first from the Donbass. Again, they're not actually there. And then from the Crimea. And again, they didn't steal it. They're building lies on top of lies on top of lies. Now, former NATO Secretary General Anders Rasmussen is also at this conference in Kiev, and he's saying Russia is trembling. Let's finish it off with force. Well, Anders, here's your rifle. Same notation for Newt Gingrich. It's sounding more like bluff and bluster. We've all been hearing about the very expensive, poor quality weapons being produced by the U.S. military-industrial complex. We also know that the United States has been at war one place or the other, multiple places, for 16 years. The stockpiles are drawn down. The existing planes, tanks, ships are worn out. What is coming off the manufacturing lines now have got all kinds of problems. They're saying now the Gerald R. Ford is never really going to be usable in combat. Too many problems with all the whiz-bang. We're talking about the corrosion problems on the Independence-class littoral combat ships, the drivetrain problems on the Freedom-class littoral combat ships, and even now the Navy is saying, yeah, they're never going to work. We've got a whole new design that we want to get built now at taxpayer expense. The stealth destroyer, the Zumwalt drivetrain problems. F-22 still asphyxiating its pilots. F-35, huge laundry list of problems. It's being deployed and it's still not complete. Still doesn't have the software for the onboard cannon. They're making up for that with a belly mount cannon. More weight, more bulk, more bloat. And in terms of dogfighting, the F-35 can be out-dogfought by 70s era vintage airplanes. The F-15 Eagle, the F-14 Tomcat, certainly the F-18 can run rings around it. The F-35 is almost a repeat of the strategic failure of the F-4 Phantom, which when it was first built didn't even have an onboard cannon. The doctrine was the electronics and the missiles are going to fight the wars for us. We're just up here to launch them and enjoy the view. And it didn't really work out, and they finally had to add a cannon to the F-4. So Nikki Haley is up at the United Nations saying we're out of options on North Korea, and she's perfectly happy with having the Pentagon attack North Korea. So who is the aggressor here? Who's talking about attacking the other country? It's not North Korea, is it? We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Nikki Haley is up there at the United Nations saying she's perfectly happy with having the Pentagon attack North Korea, saying that we've run out of options. And again, this is the U.S. arrogance fully on display, because North Korea is not the United States business as long as it's minding its own business. And so far, that's what's going on. North Korea has not attacked anybody. They have not invaded anybody. They have put out the message, do not attack or invade us. And that's what they're building up the missiles and the nuclear weapons for, because they learned their lesson from Iraq, where Saddam Hussein surrendered his chemical weapons, and he still got invaded and lynched. Or Iran, which has shut down its nuclear weapons program, and it's still in the crosshairs for invasion. So Kim Jong-un is very wisely saying, okay, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what concessions you make for the United States. They're still going to come for you when they want to come for you. Therefore, all we can do, the only option we have left, is to be prepared to make an invasion or an attack on North Korea as expensive for the United States and its allies as possible. That's what they're thinking. And Haley's out there saying, yes, we're just going to turn Mattis loose and have done with them. Haley made the comment, North Korea will be destroyed if the U.S. has to defend itself. I'm sorry, but who is on the other side of the planet having military exercises on whose border? You don't see North Korean military tooling around the Gulf of Mexico, do you? But you have all these American warplanes and ships just nudging up to the Korean Peninsula. Apparently the U.S. flew another couple of B-1 bomber exercises over South Korea to demonstrate we can come and get you. The U.S. is being provocative. And again, North Korea has made no statements indicating a desire to invade the United States. They have repeatedly stated the reason for their nuclear arsenal is to deter the United States from invading North Korea. And if you look at the history of how North Korea suffered during the beginning of the Korean War, you can understand why they might feel that way. And North Korea has come on out in response to the latest round of sanctions, saying the more sanctions you impose, the faster we're going to move toward completing our nuclear deterrent. Because North Korea understands once they have it, once they have missiles with nuclear warheads ready to go, everybody's going to back off. Now, Russia is getting very nervous over the U.S. aggression and saying that they will not allow the United States or other countries to provoke North Korea into a military conflict, as that could mean the use of weapons of mass destruction near the Russian borders. This is the head of the Upper House Committee for International Relations say. And people probably don't remember that during the start of the Korean War, General Douglas MacArthur seriously suggested nuking North Korea. Now, as you know, North Korea just had a successful test of one of their medium-range missiles. It flew out over Hokkaido and hit its target. And everybody was saying, well, we keep hearing all this talk about, when North Korea has another test, we're going to shoot it down. The U.S. said that, Japan said it, and that was like 3 tests ago, and it never happened. Everybody said, why aren't they keeping their promise to shoot down the North Korean test missiles? Well, because what if they try and shoot down the North Korean test missile and they miss? It's one thing to shoot down an incoming target that you launch it yourself, like these 2 tests of THAAD that they had here, starting in Hawaii, ending in Alaska. But the reality is that all of these missile systems the United States has developed and sold to these other countries can't reach North Korea's missiles. THAAD stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. The missile must be in the terminal stage, that is, coming down close to the target before it can be intercepted. North Korea's test missile flew over Hokkaido at an altitude of 475 miles, way into space. Japan doesn't have anything that could have intercepted the missile at that point. Neither does the United States. THAAD cannot reach that high. The Aegis interceptors can't reach that high. So they just have to sit there and shake their fist and say, gosh darn you. Now here's a little bit of an embarrassment because apparently there was a conference up in Canada talking about the North Korean threat and what was going to be done. And apparently, Canada is not a participant in the U.S. ballistic missile defense program. But the Canadian perception seems to be that Americans would shoot down an ICBM headed for a Canadian city. And apparently, the news have put out, no. As a matter of fact, a U.S. general has confirmed U.S. policy is not to defend Canada in the event of a missile attack. Now, at this point, I can't imagine why anybody would want to attack Canada anyway. Canada minds its own business. They're nice people. Screwy liberal government, but they're nice people. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. I love Canada. Of course, I haven't been there in a while. But I thought it was a really wonderful place. Wonderful people. Very clean, very polite. I really liked it. If they didn't have such a screwy government, I might actually think about wanting to retire there. Except Claire doesn't really like the snow. Now then, apparently, again, getting back to North Korea here, the U.S. made a request to Kuwait to eject the North Korean ambassador, and Kuwait went ahead and did just that. Going to go out there and prove that we're tough. We're going to have other people do our bidding for us. Let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Hey,
Hi.
what did you talk about St. Louis yet?
Yeah, at the very top of the show.
Yeah. Hey, Mike. Isn't it ironic that we protect the poppy fields of Afghanistan and we kill people to protect them, and we also kill people that sell them? He was selling heroin.
No. We only kill the people who are importing and selling drugs who are not part of the Central Intelligence Agency. Those people get off free. I actually met Freeway Ricky Ross in Los Angeles through my first wife, who was an Olympic-class substance abuser, and he used to openly brag he was with the CIA, and as long as he was with the CIA, the police would never touch him, and they never did. The war on drugs is the war on the competition's drugs.
Isn't it amazing how the police officer, the gun that was found, had his DNA on it and not the guy in the cars? I didn't.
Hold it. I didn't read that. Where's that from?
I believe that was in a couple of sources that found a gun. It was sealed up. They said it was. The information was not substantiated, but the gun they found in the car only had it was like a throwaway gun from the officer that shot.
You're saying that this was not substantiated.
Well, according, that was one of the reasons why they fired him, because he stuck when he went back into the car, the police truck or the car.
Okay.
To put his rifle away, he went into a bag, and supposedly that bag was a throwaway gun that he put back in the car, because the gun they found in the car had the officer's DNA, but not the driver of the car.
I would want to see a source on that. I would like to see a source on that. Okay, but it does explain why he's a former police officer. Well, you know, I would see maybe a manslaughter charge coming out of that one, but not first-degree murder. I mean, we are dealing with a guy who was, you know, a criminal fleeing the scene. You know, he did show aggression by backing his car into the police car twice. And I think in the circumstances, I disagree with the idea of using a drop gun, but I think a credible case could have been made that this guy was trying to find a gun. I mean, it is shown on the dash cam that instead of getting out of the car, that he's rooting around trying to find something.
It's just sad how in these days, both sides is like, you're stuck in the middle. You know, both sides are bad. You know, the good cops protect the bad cops. The criminals, you know, obviously they all protect each other. And then you have the Black Lives Matter, George Soros funded, that go out and loot and smash businesses that have nothing to do with anything. You know,
yeah, it really does. It does feel like the country is starting to fall apart here.
Hey, Mike, real quick on Syria. Did you see them? I don't know if you talked about the Russians that bombed the ports in the Euphrates River. They had ISIS, some ISIS facilities set up. Might have been a few trucks, maybe some oil trucks, a couple boats. So they knocked them out. And I know the Syrian army partially crossed the Euphrates River. So that's setting up to be a clash against the the Kurdish elements, which, you know, obviously Turkey's going to take care of eventually on that side of it, because Turkey's never going to accept like the Kurdish factions. You know, there's a different.
No, they're not.
Kurdish faction, but some nasty ones.
And Iraq is already saying that they view a new Kurdistan as a second Israel, and they will not accept that. And I don't know if you heard yet or not, but the United States has now unilaterally declared a no-fly zone north of the Euphrates, where only U.S. aviation will be allowed to operate. Nothing from Syria, nothing from Russia, nothing from Turkey. It's the usual ham-fisted assertion of authority by the United States, which has no basis in international law. You know, basically it's a blockade, and a blockade is an act of war.
Did you also notice that there's like in that whole area, there's a lot of oil facilities? I don't know if anybody noticed that.
Well, the oil is definitely what the fight's all about. You know, getting control of the oil and making sure that it's sold only for the dollar.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're going to switch right on over here to Terry in Oregon. Aloha, Terry. What's on your mind?
Oh, Mike, I just want to remind people that yesterday was Constitution Day. It was signed September 17th, 1787, 230 years ago.
Yep.
And you don't hear too much about it because, you know, they don't want to emphasize the Constitution too strongly these days. But I think we need to remember it because, in my mind, it ranks right up there with the 4th of July. I mean, the 4th of July gave us the country, and Constitution Day gave us the kind of country we're going to have. And what we got to do is remember the articles and the amendments, and remember also be aware how they're being violated today, how they're being taken away from us, and how they got no right to be taken away from us. So
you're absolutely right.
Also, there was some students who had these pamphlets made up about Constitution Day, and they were giving them out on Constitution Day. It wasn't this year, but they were accosted by campus police, and they were taken to. They said you can do this in a free speech zone. You know, way on the other side of campus. They had some area set up where they could talk, but they couldn't just mix amongst the other students and give out the pamphlets about the Constitution. I thought that was a pretty sad thing to have happen in our country.
It is a very sad thing, and the courts have finally ruled that the idea of a free speech zone is itself unconstitutional because the Bill of Rights makes it clear that you can assemble peaceably in any public space whatsoever, and petition for redress of grievances, which is what the First Amendment is really all about. I'm an absolute strict constitutionalist, and I view any government that is not 100% in compliance with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as illegal and illegitimate. But we are unfortunately seeing a repeat of what happened in Germany following the Reichstag fire and the Enabling Acts. All of Germany's civil protections for citizens were slowly stripped away until it was just this complete dictatorship. And we're seeing the exact same thing happen here. And now we're seeing the independent media come under attack, and things are getting a little bit tense out here.
Right. Hey, Mike, what was that website you mentioned earlier about the Middle East news? It was changing it around and stuff. It's
not a website. It's an organization called Memory. But you might do a web search for an article that was called Selective Memory, MEMRI, which was an expose that came out in the British press saying, look, these guys are not providing honest translations. They're always biased in favor of Israel's political agenda. Memory was the organization that claimed Ahmadinejad said he was going to wipe Israel off the map. And that wasn't what he said. What he actually said was that Israel will fade from the pages of history. Now, one is a very active declaration, and the other one is a passive observation. But any time that Memory can make it more provocative or twist things to place anybody in the Muslim world in a negative light, they're going to do it. And unfortunately, Western media, they love these little propaganda laundries because then they can put out the lies with their hands are clean. I'll give you another good example. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which has been pushing for the removal of Assad. It's not in Syria. It's a one-house operation out of Coventry, England, and the guy's day job is he's a T-shirt salesman. And he just puts out all this information under the name Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, and the Western media grabs it and publishes it all over the world. And if they ever get called on the lies, they say, well, look, this is just what we got from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. And yet if they actually looked at it, they would realize it's a propaganda laundry is what it is.
Exactly. And, if the translation between Farsi and English was way off in that particular case, that you're
definitely
talking about.
Yeah, but, Israel is assuming also, most Americans don't speak Farsi.
Right, and then I heard a preacher one time tell his congregation that, he took it one step further. He said, Ahmadinejad wanted to bomb Israel off the face of the earth. I mean, this is really getting, it was one thing to say, if the Palestinians were allowed to vote, that they vote out the Israeli faction in Palestine. But then they took it the next step, and then they took it to the next step, and pretty soon Ahmadinejad's going to bomb Israel off the face of the earth.
When you were a kid, did you ever play the game of gossip, where you line up a bunch of kids and you whisper something to the first kid, and he whispers it to the second, who whispers it to the third, and by the time it gets to the end of the chain, it's usually completely different. And that same
barely recognized.
Yeah, barely recognize. That same thing is happening between those who start the propaganda and the corporate media, and then it goes on out into the general population who are getting the message, you are supposed to hate Iran or you're supposed to hate North Korea, and as they pass that information on to other people, they'll unconsciously put their own spin on it to make it look worse than it really is. And again, that earlier caller was right. We all need to just absolutely understand and accept that primary source of information we have, that corporate media, they are lying to us about pretty much everything except the sports scores and the weather, and they're not all that good on the weather.
Yeah, and, in that game you're talking about, they're interpreting it the wrong way. But today it's blatant lies, saying he said this, which is, on purpose, not, through translation,
Yeah, truth is the first Okay? Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Well, there's an old saying, truth is the first casualty of war. And we're seeing it here right now. I mean, look at the whoppers they were telling us about Saddam's nuclear weapons, and he was going to uncork on Europe in just 45 minutes, and then it was over on Syria and Assad. He's got all these horrible... It's the same pattern. When the United States decides they're going to attack a foreign country, the corporate media's job is to demonize the country, demonize the people. Oh, look, they dress funny. They don't live the way we do. They're obviously inferior. And then portray the country's leadership as out of control, lunatic, wild people, a threat to all of civilization, justifying attack by the United States. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go right back to the phone. Sherry in Fredericksburg. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. This is just due to, maybe this has been talked about before, but I'm so ignorant about bombs. This misdirecting, is it possible for us to misdirect a missile to intercept, not intercept it, but to just make it go like hit Japan from North Korea or something like that and say, oh, look what they've done. They've bombed Japan. Would that be possible?
Well, it all depends
for us to
It all depends on how the North Korean rockets, missiles are being guided. Now, we know one of the weaknesses of the U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles is they use the GPS system to navigate across the face of the Earth, and the problem with that is GPS can be spoofed. And as a matter of fact, the Russian firm Kalishnikov has literally come out with a shoulder-mounted device where you can jam the GPS signal of a drone or a cruise missile and send it off course. Now, that's a very good reason to not be using GPS. And whether or not you could jam GPS on a North Korean missile 475 miles away, that would take a huge amount of transmitter power to do. But again, not knowing exactly how North Korea is guiding their missiles, it's kind of hard to say. Now, I do know that on some versions of America's ICBMs, particularly the MIRVed ones, the buses actually navigate by the stars. They have little sensor viewports all over them, and they basically align the platform on the stars so that they know they're oriented correctly. And from then, they then do that little dance where they'll skip over here, release a warhead, skip over there, release a warhead, and so forth and so on. GPS is a weak point in anybody who's using that as a guidance technology for a weapon.
Okay, what is it we threatened to do that we haven't done? Was that intercept a missile, but it's just out of our reach, or how did that work?
Well,
you said we threatened to do something we didn't do.
Basically about 3-4 North Korean tests ago, both Japan and the United States said if North Korea launches another test missile, we will shoot it down. And they haven't. They haven't even tried. And the reality is that North Korea's missiles, while they're in that coast phase at the top of the arc, they're out of reach of all of the missile systems that we have. All of the systems that we have are designed for terminal defense, which means you're sitting that missile system is sitting right on the target, which means the incoming warhead is coming right to them, and that brings it within range. But being able to shoot a missile that's 475 miles in space, we don't have the weapons right now.
What if we had something up in the stratosphere, though, like masers? I don't know if anyone's heard of masers. They're lasers where you can listen to the stars, and the base for them is up in the stratosphere where the temperature is cold, because when this apparatus is used with this laser, it needs to be in a cold environment, so it makes it so noise doesn't interfere so much. And if we can listen to stars with masers, what if we pointed that thing down to Earth and did something from up? Something from above.
Okay, well, first of all, let's back up here a little bit. Masers predate lasers. Masers were actually the first development of having a stimulated emission of radiation, and it was done in the microwave regions because it was easier there, and it was designed to make a more sensitive radio receiver. They're not transmitters, they're receivers, and they don't have to be up in the stratosphere. They're used on radio telescopes here on Earth, and yes, the devices are chilled down to reduce noise and to actually make them a little bit more sensitive. So there really isn't anything a maser could do because it's a receiving device. I'm sure it could be turned into a transmitter as well, but not a. Yeah, they could definitely do that. Lasers are the same principle, operating in the optical spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum. Anyway, listen, I need to let you go. We got to take a break here.
Thank you.
And I'll fill out the rest of the detail when we get back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And, of course, being able to intercept an incoming ICBM during the coast phase was a major objective of Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. And they spent vast sums of money, much of it borrowed, and we're not able to really solve a lot of those problems. And again, with regard to the terminal phase, the issue there is that all of our missile systems, whether it's Aegis or THAAD or Patriot or whatever, are built around a doctrine of the incoming threat following a predictable ballistic path, where you can predict exactly where it will be at the moment the interceptor gets there. But Russia's latest generation MIRV warhead, and presumably China's as well, are maneuverable. They bob up and down, they weave back and forth, they corkscrew, they dipsy-doodle, and that makes a ballistic-based intercept absolutely impossible. Before we go back to the phones here, we're now getting word that Hurricane Maria has been upgraded to a Category 4 hurricane. It's heading to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Those people who haven't finished cleaning up from the last one, they got to be feeling really picked on right now. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Miles in Maine. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Dustin makes so many good calls. I wanted to kind of explain a couple things about that St. Louis incident. One, the perplexing thing for me is they settled this case years back for $900,000 out of court, paid the money, which I don't see why there'd be any charges now 5 years later. But additionally, the officers both saw the car drive by that almost ran them over and ran into the police vehicle twice. They both saw the gun in the car. Now, to answer Dustin's question, a guy who's a convicted felon previously and looking at going to be a felon again that's carrying a gun is not going to have his fingerprints on that gun. So if he's got to throw it away or whatever, he can deny any relationship to that weapon. So that's why there were no fingerprints on the gun. Now, curiously, which is very curious to me, they say they found the DNA in there, but the officer unloaded the firearm and set it on the passenger seat, and there were no fingerprints on it. But yet there was DNA on it.
That seems rather weird. If he unloaded that gun, I mean, obviously it makes sense that his fingerprints along with his DNA would be there.
Exactly, but there were no fingerprints of either person. And like I said, now I know convicted felons that when they're carrying a gun, because that's an additional crime, they're not able to own a legal gun. So probably that firearm, it would be interesting to know if it was stolen or not or who it was registered to. That's never mentioned. So I think in the summary of events here, I think what this whole situation is, because the prosecutor was retiring, I think this was a makeup call for the Michael Brown incident, which, by the way, I think Officer Wilson was justified as well. But I think this was trying to be a makeup call on that incident, and that's how we got to this. And I think the judge was intelligent and saw through everything. I think he made the right call. I sure hope he did. I don't want to see anybody unnecessarily killed or injured. But I think that the officers, you know, the other officer said he's got a gun. The other one, they both saw the gun. And that's consistent. So I think the judge made the right decision. But I wanted to share that with Dustin because he makes so many good calls, and I'm one of his people out here that support his calls. And I support your show, Mike. Great show again. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to do a little more digging to see if I can get a confirmation on this idea that Smith's fingerprints or DNA were not on the gun. And again, you make a very valid point. If he's a convicted felon, and he's caught with a gun, he's in serious trouble just right there. And so he would probably make a point, if he had a gun, of making sure it was as clean as possible. And not having seen the gun, there are things that you can do to make a gun not have fingerprints, like wrap cloth tape around the handle and the trigger. And if you use it and then toss it, the idea that your fingerprints are going to be there, that's a long shot. I'll tell you where most crooks really screw up is they'll rig the gun so it won't retain a fingerprint, and then they'll forget about the bullets. Because when you're loading those bullets into the clip, you leave all kinds of fingerprints all over the brass, and the brass just loves to hang onto those fingerprints. So, anyway, Miles, thanks an awful lot for the information. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the Korean situation, Russia and China have kicked off a massive joint naval drill near the Korean Peninsula, and apparently as part of that, Russia has test-fired one of their Iskander missiles. This is something that is giving nightmares to some of the planners in the Pentagon. And so they test-fired that. It was a successful test. But again, none of this is going to make things calm down in Korea. Now, last week, Bezalel Smotrich, a member of the Israeli Knesset from the Jewish Home Party, basically came on out and said, announced what was called the decision plan on how they're going to handle the Palestinians. And it is basically a plan for Israel to annex all Palestinian territories officially and to basically coerce the Palestinians to either agree to live under apartheid as a reduced status population and relinquish national aspirations or be expelled out completely. So Israel's getting ready to just complete their acquisition of Palestine. And they may call it legal, but we know it's wrong. I mean, everything that was done by the Nazis was the letter of the law under Germany at the time. But we all know it was not the right thing to be doing here. Now, we're still hearing all this nonsense about the Cuban embassy. This came out of Zero Hedge. The U.S. is now evaluating shuttering the Cuban embassy after unexplained sonic attacks. This is coming from Rex Tillerson. And Cuba is saying, look, we're not doing anything. And apparently the latest attack was some kind of a blaring, grinding noise which supposedly jolted an American diplomat from his bed in the Capri, which is a Havana hotel popular with tourists, which sounds to me like he wasn't actually in the embassy. But the diplomat, according to the AP, moved just a few feet, and there was silence. And then he climbed back into bed, and then the agonizing sound hit him again. None of this has a reasonable explanation. Blah, 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 blah. Now, this is another example of look for what should be there and isn't. Cuba wants normalized relations with the United States. They want an end to the almost 60-year-old embargo. So if indeed something actually happened, and we don't know for a fact that it did, it is not Cuba who is doing it. Now, it is possible to, using multiple transducers, to create a circumstance in which a sound can only be heard in a specific location. It takes a lot of engineering to do. But in this case, they're talking about being in the Capri Hotel. I think it's just more propaganda to sell us all on the idea that Cuba is bad, Cuba is evil, we shouldn't normalize relations with them, and we should just go on in and invade them because that's what we should have done 60 years ago. And here I was getting ready to sample that fine Cuban rum and those fine Cuban cigars. Very, very upsetting. Again, why would Cuba do anything to the U.S. diplomats? It's not in Cuba's interest. Who benefits from the U.S. diplomats to Cuba being driven out? Those who want to attack and invade Cuba. So let's talk a little bit about the economic news. Jim Rogers is warning that if Trump starts a trade war with China, it will end U.S. hegemony, which is already seriously strained right now. More and more countries are pulling at the leash of the United States, and they're pivoting toward Russia. And so basically, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin's threat, the U.S. is going to impose economic sanctions on China if it does not implement the new sanctions regime against North Korea. and saying if China doesn't do what we tell them to do, we're going to put additional sanctions on them. Now, again, Mnuchin does not understand the Asian concept of face. And anybody who's conducting foreign policy with Asia, especially with China and Japan and Korea, if they don't understand that idea of face, they're going to make horrific mistakes. And I think they just did. Basically, if we start sanctioning China, it's going to hurt America more than it hurts China. For one thing, all those big box stores are going to dry up. There won't be any product on the shelves. And it will force China and Russia and other countries to pull together and cooperate. And that shows you how short-sighted all this sanction, everything policy happens to be. And remember, we've already got Russia and China cooperating militarily in that exercise off the Korean Peninsula. Another story coming out of Zero Hedge. Central banks are petrified. This is Chris Martenson on the hyperinflationary threat of China dumping the dollar. More and more countries are dumping the dollar. They're starting to go to the yuan and the ruble. And it's already started. China and their allies have dumped the dollar in oil trading. Venezuela is now publishing their oil basket price denominated in yuan. Meanwhile, over in Germany, German companies that were working in Russia are rejecting the new anti-Russian sanctions law adopted by the U.S. last month. They're just going to ignore it. In fact, they're saying it's time for countermeasures. The U.S. sanctions all over the world have brought tremendous financial harm to Europe, and more people are saying it is time to fight back. If the U.S. wants an economic war, we're going to give them one. Now, over in Algeria, they're now going the route of the helicopter money to deal with their budget crisis and declining oil revenue, another victim of the misguided oil price war against Russia. A lot of people are very nervous that Mexico may monetize its silver Libertad coin, which is going to have major repercussions for the silver market. Right now, because silver does not exist in coins, silver rounds and bars are basically bought and sold with melt price plus uplift. If Mexico monetizes its silver Libertad coin, people are just going to start buying that coin, and they will buy it for the face value. And that would be a really good investment. But for all those people putting out paper silver contracts, it would be a nightmare. Amid the Chinese crackdown on the exchanges, Bitcoin has tumbled 28% this week. Now, last week we were talking about the new iPhone launch, the iPhone 10 or the iPhone X, along with the updated iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. And a lot of people were saying, boy, $1,000 for an iPhone? That's a little bit much, and apparently that's the common perception. And obviously the iPhone's facial recognition system failed during the release, didn't help things. Apple's share price actually plunged. There are concerns that people are not going to spend $1,000 for an iPhone. And apparently there's already talk, because of all these Chinese sanctions, of possible delays in the supply chain, because the iPhones are still being made over in China. They make them very well. Iconic toy store Toys R Us could file for bankruptcy today. May have already filed for today. So if you're going to be doing any Christmas shopping for the kiddies, you better get it done right now, because they're not going to be around anymore. That's actually an issue for us here on Oahu. Because all the other toy stores in the immediate neighborhood have already gone out of business, like KB Toys, victim of Mitt Romney. And now, if Toys R Us closes down, not much left except the Hobby Lobby, which it's not part of the franchise Hobby Lobby. It's a little local store. Interestingly enough, in downtown Los Angeles, they have the largest homeless population in the entire United States. They also have the highest vacancy rate for rental units. And apparently most of those vacancies are in the luxury apartments. and they've hit a 12% vacancy rate. This reminds me of something I said a few years ago with this out-of-control debt-based economic system. We were leading to a nation where we were going to see millions of homeless camped out in front of boarded-up mansions. And it seems like we're definitely headed that way. Another article coming out of Patriot Rising saying that long-term mortgage delinquencies are being seriously underreported. They don't want you to know things are actually starting to come apart. But then the U.S. government lies about all the economic indicators. They're lying about the rate of inflation. They're lying about the number of unemployed. Yeah, they're going to lie about everything. It's all they know how to do. They don't know how to fix the problem. Well, actually, they do. They know how to fix the problem. Andrew Jackson knew how to fix the problem. But nobody in Washington, D.C. has the courage to suggest that. They're all on the hook to the money junkies. The money junkies are perfectly willing to share their loot with the politicians as long as the politicians keep things the way they are right now. Now, we've been talking a lot about the problems over at the VA with some of our wounded soldiers being made to wait months, if not years, for much-needed medical care. And many of them die while waiting. Well, it turns out this problem is not confined just to the VA. Apparently, Social Security disability, their backlog tops 1 million, and the average wait is nearly 2 years, longer than most of the people applying for disability are likely to live. That seems to be the new solution to balance the budget. Just stall, stall, stall until the people asking for money die. It's amazing. A little bit of information. Remember the London tube bombing, the fizzle thing? Yes, it turned out the bomber was a refugee. The president of Poland is saying there is no doubt the growing wave of terrorism in Europe is linked to the migration. And he's absolutely right. But all of these open border, New World Order, global government people are out there saying, well, a little bit of terrorism. I mean, come on. Are you going to let that get in the way of the one world government? Of course you won't. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about immigration issues, the refugees. And over in Germany, apparently 4 asylum seekers have been arrested after gang raping a 56-year-old woman. This was in Dessau, Germany. And it happened on the grounds of a former vocational school last month. And they finally arrested these guys. Were all identified. They're all from Eritrea. And this is why so many people in Europe are saying that this was a bad idea. And they're getting furious that so many of their leaders, like Angela Merkel, are still out there saying, we don't care if you're being raped and robbed and infected with dangerous diseases. We are keeping those borders open. Now, Donald Trump just came up with what I think is a very good, very fair idea. For those countries that refuse to accept deportees from the United States, he's going to start limiting their visas. And I think that's a really good idea. See, it's one thing to say we're going to round up all these MS-13 gang members and we're going to deport them back to Mexico, but then you have Mexico saying, we don't want them. We were happy to be rid of them. That's what's complicating the deportation issue, is that these countries that these people came from don't want them back. Again, it's a filtering process. The refugees that are coming from these other countries, they're not the best. These are people who couldn't make it in their own countries. They're criminals. They're fleeing prosecution in some cases. And of course their home countries aren't going to want them back. They're the United States problem now. Let them take care of them here. Now, speaking of Angela Merkel, as you know, their elections are tomorrow. And it's not going to be a slam dunk for Angela Merkel. There is a huge populist resurgence going on. And it looks like the Alternative for Germany party is going to succeed in getting some members into the German parliament. They don't know how many yet. I'm sure there's going to be massive amounts of election fraud going on to keep the status quo in place. But there is a huge public backlash against Merkel. Now, Austria is basically defying both Merkel and the EU. And again, the widespread backlash against refugee immigration in the developed countries. This is not working out. This is not making these people happy. It's provoking intense nationalistic furor. And it really ought to. And we should have that here. That's what everybody was hoping for with Make America Great. The American people and the American government should be concerned with America, not trying to go on out and play God with the rest of the world, because after all, that's George Soros' job. Now we're finding out a scandal where apparently Brussels has been using taxpayer money to fund the people smugglers. We'll be right back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Okay, now then, EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker has issued an ultimatum to President Donald Trump that he should stop applauding Brexit and become more supportive of the United European Union bloc. And he threatens to hit back if Trump does not change his tune. Basically, Juncker is saying that if Trump goes on cheering for Brexit, that the EU is going to start encouraging Texas to secede. Not that Texans need much encouragement to do that right now. A lot of places in this country are talking about secession. Here in Hawaii, we're talking about restoration of our sovereignty, because under the letter of the law, our inclusion into the United States is questionable. Legality. But there are talks about the Western States Coalition seceding, Alaska seceding. People are not really very happy to be part of this federalized United States of America. They want to go back to being a league of sovereign independent states with a weak central government that minds its own business. Now, over in Catalonia, their defiance of Spanish authority is on the verge of turning into a rebellion. And everybody's saying, what's the big deal? Why not let them go? Well, here's what the reality is going on. Catalonia is a cash cow for Madrid. That one province is by far the richest in the country, and it contributes much more to the national budget than it receives. With 16% of Spain's population, the region produces 25% of the nation's exports, hosts 23% of industry, and receives 11% of government expenditures. It's a parasitic relationship where Spain is basically sucking off of Catalonia, and they are sick and tired of it. They want it to go away. All right, let's take a phone call. Andy in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. No, how much freedom is enough freedom for Mike Rivero? Do you want just enough freedom so you feel free, or do you want freedom for everybody?
I think everybody ultimately ought to be free, but there has to be some common sense restrictions, which is you don't let people go steal from each other or kill each other. There has to be a universally accepted code of ethics and morality to hold society together. But I think other than that, government ought to mind its own business. I certainly want the freedom to write personal thoughts in my journal on my computer, secure in the knowledge that somebody over at the NSA isn't giggling themselves silly over that. And, that's what I want. I want the freedom to make the most out of my life. And right now, most Americans, no matter how hard they work, their standard of living is being crushed down to favor the money junkies.
Well, let's take a look at St. Louis. Okay, first and foremost, if you're a staunch believer in the Constitution, there's no law against doing drugs in this country. There's codes and ordinances which have been left up to the states via the usurpation of the 10th Amendment. Okay, that whatever's not afforded to this country shall be reserved for the states or whatever. Well, but they also had to sign on to the Constitution. They could not just, they couldn't just write off our rights and stuff. So in this St. Louis situation, here's these cops. They roll up on this guy who they seen do a drug deal. There's no law against drug deals except for ordinances and codes, which is a violation of your privacy, your Fourth Amendment and whatnot. So had these guys not been after these people, let alone having a license to drive or a tag on your car or a safety sticker, none of this is constitutional. So if you're a staunch constitutionalism, the cops could have ended it right off the bat simply by not even messing with these guys. Then there was a second time when he could have avoided killing this person. Once he realized that the guy complying to him, opening his door to get, and he saw his hands moving in his bed, that's not a justification to blow 5 rounds into his window and kill the guy.
Well, wait a minute, Andy, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Let's see what happens. Well, we're only taking a chance that he might get a gun, roll out the car, and start shooting cops. That's irrelevant. These people are supposed to protect society. They don't really know.
Okay, Andy, we're going to let you go here. We're here to have a discussion, which means we each say something, the other one responds, then the other person responds, and the other person responds. You don't come on my radio show and just start screaming and try and get your message through despite the host saying, I'd like to respond. Now, I'll be the first one to say that I am not in agreement with many of the drug laws that are here in this nation. And yes, there are constitutional reasons to question their validity. I'm certainly not in agreement with the civil forfeiture laws supposedly justified by the drug trade that allow the police to just steal property willy-nilly all over the place. I'm sure we all agree right now that the government that we have right now is a long distance away from that described by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And the government has a long history of straining at its leash, its chain, which has led to things like the Tennessee Whiskey Rebellion, where the people in Tennessee said the Constitution does not allow the government to control or tax alcohol that we make for our own use. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And as far as the situation with the officer, and again, I need to get to more facts, and there's a lot of false information that's out there. But in the context of the police are convinced that there is a law against heroin trafficking, and because this Smith did the deal out in public, the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to him. If you're out in public, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy. So let's get that out of the way right now. But the guy's a known felon. He hit the police car twice, then he fled. And that immediately says we have to give the police the benefit of the doubt here. And it was reported by witnesses and on the dash cam that when the police officer asked the suspect to get out of the car, the suspect did not open the door and instead started rummaging around on the floor of the car for something. Now, at that point, I think it's reasonable for the police officer to suspect that the guy's looking for a weapon. So, moving on here. Do you remember Sandy Hook or Sandy Hoax? And interesting gentleman, Wolfgang Halbig, he has been basically the vanguard of research into Sandy Hook. And he's found a lot of information. He's taken a lot of abuse. We had him on the show here a while ago. He is now being sued for $55 million by the father of one of the victims, Noah Ponzer. And this is, he's sued by Leonard Ponsner, the alleged father of the reported 6-year-old shooting victim, Noah Ponzer, who was allegedly killed by a 20-year-old lone gunman named Adam Lanza, along with 19 other children and 6 staffers during the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, which we all know took place in a school that was not actually operating at the time. And see, here is why it's interesting. I know $55 million is a lot of money, and there's going to be a lot of court costs, but it's going to allow Wolfgang Halbig to present his evidence in court, because the only grounds that Leonard has for suing Halbig is some variation of libel or defamation, and Halbig, in being allowed to defend himself, is going to be allowed to present in a court of law the copious amount of evidence which has led him and many other people to suggest that this was another staged incident by the U.S. government to push various anti-gun agendas. So let's talk about the Equifax meltdown, the disaster. Huge exposure of personal data. In fact, Claire was just telling me she got a notice from our bank saying that there may be an issue there, so we're having to look into that whole idea. But one of the things that really makes people very upset is that Equifax knew about this breach actually quite a while ago, and they withheld the information for several weeks, well, for a couple of weeks, during which some of Equifax's top executives dumped their stock. And there's another suspicious trade that was out there. Apparently there was a 135 strike price put option, put on trades. Somebody expected their stock to go down and hit 135, at which point there was an automated buy. And it sticks out like a sore thumb. Somebody knew something was going on all the way back on August 21st. But 143 million Americans have been impacted by this data breach. Now, we don't know where the data is. One story was that Equifax was contacted and said that the data would be basically destroyed if they paid a ransom, and if they didn't pay the ransom, the data would go out on the dark net. It's an ugly situation, and it's made all the more complex by the fact that Equifax knew there was a weakness in their system. They had the patch available for it, and they just didn't bother installing. And cybercrime it's completely out of control now. It is completely out of control, thanks in part to the NSA and the CIA, which have mandated all these holes and backdoors and workarounds and secret passwords into all of our systems for the benefit of surveillance on us law-abiding American citizens. And all of this information is now available to the cyber criminals. It is a major mess, and these government agencies are responsible for allowing it to happen. Encouraging it to happen. They developed the tools. Now, if you are on a Windows machine, you have probably heard about a tool called CCleaner. It's available in a free version. There's also a premium version. It's CCleaner stands for crap cleaner, and it's a way of cleaning up junk out of your website. It's not antivirus, it's not anti-malware, but it is a very useful tool for keeping your machine running efficiently. Unfortunately, somebody hacked into the servers used to distribute the update to CCleaner and replaced it with a malicious version that contained a multi-stage malware payload that steals data from the infected computers and sends it to the attacker's remote command and control servers. So if you updated CCleaner or downloaded CCleaner on your computer after August 15th, but before September 12th of this year, from the official CCleaner website, your computer has been compromised. And that is a very scary situation when known and recognized programs can be compromised by compromising the download servers. Computer crime is totally out of control, and the reaction of the U.S. government is, yeah. It's good for the economy. You'll have to buy more computer security software and more anti-malware and more of this, and we'll get more money out of you. This is a good thing. By the way, if you use Rackspace as your email server, there's a phishing scam going around right now, and Rackspace is aware of it. They're trying to shut it down. And basically, you will get an email saying, we're from Rackspace here, and we're upgrading the server, and we need you to reconfirm your account information or update your account information. And they give you a link which actually starts, the URL actually begins with a legitimate Rackspace URL, but then there's a couple of other extensions on the end of it, which tells you it's a complete fake. And I did talk to the people at Rackspace, and they said, yes, they know all about this. You just have to be so careful right now. It is an out-of-control problem. And it's costing this nation dearly. It's costing us in productivity at a time where our economy cannot survive it. This should be at the top of the list of clear and present dangers, and we're getting a big nothing from the government, maybe because they don't know how to fix it. Mostly because they know they helped create the problem. with all of this NSA and CIA backdoors, hidden passwords, and all the rest of it. All of this stuff is being found by these hackers. Now, if you're like me, most of the time you get up in the morning and you want to do the work that you want to do, which in my case is the blog and getting ready for the radio show and, music for Claire's Choir and all the other things that I'm involved in. Anytime there's a security issue, it's taking time away from what I would consider to be productive work. I don't consider time spent dealing with security problems to be well spent at all. It's a total waste of my time to have to do this. On the other hand, these cyber criminals, that's all they do all day long is think about ways to mess around with your computer, including those who are constantly attacking my server. But it is really out of control. You want to talk about the Wild Wild West? It's not the internet, it's the cyber criminals. Apparently, Vivo Music Video Service has been hacked. 3.12 terabytes of internal data has been leaked. See, here's the problem. You can buy all the security software you want, all the antivirus, anti-malware, anti-whatever, and it's not going to work if the cyber criminals are using the tools developed by the NSA and the CIA, because the NSA and the CIA have gone out to all the security vendors and made sure that their malware will pass through the system. So that's what the cyber criminals are doing. They're using the U.S. government's tools and the U.S. mandated holes in your security to carry out these attacks. Here's a good example. There is a 17-year-old bug in Microsoft Windows kernel that allows security, it basically prevents security software from detecting malware at runtime. And the security issue resides in the kernel. There's a big long name for the routine, and it impacts all versions of Windows since Windows 2000. The problem is Microsoft is saying they will not patch this. They do not consider it a security vulnerability. Well, if it's not a security vulnerability, then it is a mandated backdoor. All right, let's take some phone calls. Chris in St. Petersburg, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Chris, are you there? Okay, I guess. Hello, are you there?
Now?
You're cutting in and out. Can you put your mouth a little closer to the microphone?
All right, do you read me now?
Yeah, I hear you now.
All right, this St. Louis murder acquittal of the officer, Jason Stockley, of Anthony Lamar Smith is being underreported, the fact that the officer, Jason Stockley, according to the only reason that the murder charges were brought this past September 2016 was that new video from outside the apparent crime scene showed Officer Stockley taking an object from his vehicle, and which was shown on the squad car video, taking it from the duffel bag in his back seat. The new video that surfaced this past September 2016 shows that object being placed in Anthony Lamar Smith's vehicle, and apparently a rifle as well. So there's no doubt it was to plant the weapons on Anthony Lamar Smith. So that's why the murder charges were brought once again. And that's that one little.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. Okay, maybe a drop gun, handgun was planted. Why a rifle? I mean, that's an awfully large object to stealthily, plant in Smith's car. That part of the story just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yes, I have seen the video myself, the new video.
Can you send it to me?
The squad car video.
Can you send it to me?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's easy to search online, but, I guess the person, after all these years after the killing of Anthony Lamar Smith, the person who came and revealed this video that's shot from above the scene, was afraid to reveal it until this past September 2016.
We also can't rule out the fact that the video could be a fake. I mean, we've seen corporate media create fake videos of all kinds of things here. I want to see this thing for myself, okay?
Oh, sure, it could be a fake, but, like I said, the murder charges were brought against. I haven't heard any question of this third-party video. And on the squad car video, as you may know, the officer, Stockley, said, I'm going to kill him on the way as he was chasing him, before he actually did shoot him.
Well, I think that's kind of adrenaline speaking. And I know police talk tough. I've heard a lot of it. I had this half-brother was a sheriff. Oh, boy, was he scary. Anyway, listen, we got to let you go, Chris. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And a story just now breaking. This is from the Duran. And what they're basically talking about is that Hillary Clinton, apparently, shortly after she lost the election, she transferred $800,000 from her failed 2016 presidential campaign to Onward Together, which was the group that launched in May. And this is all covered in documents filed with the FEC. It has now been revealed that Onward Together is heavily backing resistance and extremist groups such as Antifa. So all this kerfuffle down in St. Louis, and again, they found the Craigslist ads. These people are being basically bought and paid to be there and to cause the trouble. Anyway, let's take a phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike? Mike, you mentioned Wolfgang Halbig before, right, about the guy Posner. Posner is one of the most vile of, well, they're all to me vile because they're crisis actors, and they're using grown children who are now grown and giving pictures of when they were very young. But with Posner, he appeared. Not only did he supposedly die in Sandy Hook, but somehow he came back to life and was killed again in a terrorist attack in Pakistan, the military school. His picture was there. I don't know. I'm pretty sure you've seen it. It was pretty common on the internet.
Yeah, I saw that, but I wasn't ready to say that they're definitely the same people. The fact of the matter is, when you've got billions of human beings on this planet, the fact is that you're going to find people who look very much alike, could almost be twins, even though they're from different families. In fact, I had just yesterday down at Claire's church, one of the people there was absolutely convinced they'd seen me walking in, I think it was Waianae, and I haven't been in Waianae in a very, very long time, but they were absolutely convinced that this person that they saw was me. So there's somebody else on this island who looks like a decrepit curmudgeon, just like me, and I feel sorry for him for that. But I mean, this is the reason why these facial recognition systems are all failing, is because there are people who just, out of sheer chance, there's only so many faces available. But as far as Halbig is concerned, let me come on back in here and say I'm absolutely in agreement. Sandy Hook was another staged PR stunt by the U.S. government to push the gun grabber agenda, and they did it very poorly. They left behind all kinds of indications that it was a fraud. My favorite is that video that shows this guy coming out of the building, and he's all smiles and joking, and they're getting ready to interview him about how he just lost his kid. And you see him just literally trying to work himself down to being upset. It was an actor's technique, very obviously an actor.
By the way, that was even before Wolfgang Halbig got involved. As a matter of fact, the first time I saw that was on InfoWars, with the guy smiling and all that, and then coming down. And you know what that reminded me of is Slick Willie when he went to the Ron Brown's funeral there.
Yes.
The same thing. He was smiling and joking, and then but as far as
but Bill Clinton was better at it. Bill Clinton was better at it. He didn't have to work his way down. He just went from smiling and happy to tear-stricken in just a half second. Got to admire him for that.
Yeah.
Deserves an Academy Award for that.
As far as Posner's kid, ain't nobody looks that much like, unless he had a twin brother, and I think we would know if he had a twin brother, and that would be some coincidence if he was killed at some military school in Pakistan. Okay, this is a phony. This is a fraud. This is the public has to be. I can't. Yeah, I believe he's going to. Posner is, I believe Posner is going to withdraw very, at some opportune time for some, say some kind of nonsense.
Well, I think what they ought to do...
I'm telling you, Wolfgang knows this stuff.
Mark, hang on a second, okay, because we're almost out of time here. Got a commercial break here. I think Halbig would be smartest to go with the hard evidence that we have that the school was not actually an active school at the time. We know that it was deteriorated, that it wasn't in use. We know from the Internet records that it had stopped operation as a school a couple of years before. And just go with that. That's easily to document. If you go before a jury and say, well, we think this is the same person in these two photos, the jury's not going to buy that. And so I definitely would not go with that. Anyway, thank you very much for the phone call, and we got to take
tons of more evidence than that.
Yeah, there's a ton of evidence out there, and I hope Halbig prevails.
And Wolfgang, I talked to Wolfgang.
Doesn't get depressed. Got to let you go.
Believe me.
Got to let you go. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, getting on back to those warship collisions, the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain. Well, apparently the U.S. Navy has sacked more commanders over that situation. The Navy has dismissed an admiral and a captain in connection with the two deadly accidents where U.S. warships collided with commercial vessels in the Pacific. And this comes less than a month after the Navy fired the commander of the 7th Fleet. So Rear Admiral Charles Williams, commander of Task Force 70, and Captain Jeffrey Bennett, commander of Destroyer Squadron 15, have been fired by 7th Fleet Commander Vice Admiral Phil Sawyer. Both reliefs were due to a loss of confidence in their ability to command, which sounds very generic. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. Linda in Utah, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Hey, I didn't get in on the Sandy Hook thing, but, you know, I'd be the first one to really believe that it was a hoax. But I have a niece that lives there, was going to that school, and a friend of hers was shot and killed. Another child was killed from the church congregation that my sister attends. So I'm just really confused about this whole thing.
I'm not saying that people weren't really killed. I'm just saying that it was set up and staged. I mean, it's like the Boston Marathon bombing, where there were people who were really hurt and really killed there. Anytime the U.S. does one of these false flags, they don't care if people get killed. Look at 9/11 and how many thousands died in that. It's just the price of doing business. But the real issue is that we are told that the perpetrators of 9/11, the Boston Marathon bombing, and Sandy Hook are different than who the real perpetrators were. And all of these events are exploited to push a political agenda.
Right. So you talk about the father that came out there and was talking to news people with a smile on his face, and then he gets all prepared, and then he's all sad when they start rolling. So are all of those put out there just to keep us confused?
Well, they're out there to push an agenda. You know, I mean, I'll give you a good example. Columbine. Columbine happened just as the state was getting ready to pass a very liberal concealed carry law. And the gun grabbers didn't want that. And it almost seemed, we've seen this pattern repeat. Anytime, anywhere is going to loosen up the gun restrictions, there's always some kind of a mass shooting to remind us all about how dangerous guns are. And yet, when you try and remind everybody that the people who are accused in these mass shootings, whether it was the Batman shooting or Columbine itself, that these people were on serious mind-distorting prescription medications, you're not supposed to talk about that at all. In fact, following Sandy Hook, there was an effort by citizens of Connecticut using their state's equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act to obtain information as to what medications Adam Lanza was on. There were a lot of claims made on the Internet about various medicines that he was on. And an attorney for the state's medical examiner office, Patrick Quantiche, came on into the hearing and argued that even if in this one instance Adam Lanza's medications were the reason for the violence, that was something the American people shouldn't be told, because it would discourage them from taking the medications their doctors were prescribing them. And Patrick Kaonohi was wrong on a couple of different points. First of all, it's not just the one case. If you go to ssristories.com, you will find hundreds and hundreds of documented cases where perfectly normal, healthy people are given these medications by their doctor, and all of a sudden they flip out, they commit suicide, they commit acts of mass violence, and it's a very dangerous situation. The other part is, though, if you look at Connecticut and how much of their state's economy is tied up in these pharmaceutical corporations, then you understand what Patrick's real purpose there was to do. Had nothing to do with the truth or protecting the American people. It was protecting the profits of the pharmaceutical industries.
Right, but, I'll bet you anything that, what's his name that there's a lawsuit against?
Halbig.
Pardon?
Halbig. Wolfgang Halbig. Yeah,
Wolfgang. I'll bet you anything he doesn't get to present his evidence.
It's going to be very hard for the judge to simply say, we're not allowed to defend yourself, because we haven't gone to the extreme yet where you're not allowed to defend yourself against a charge in court. My main concern is that Halbig may get really, really depressed, or take a trip in a small airplane, or a lonely stroll in a suburban Washington, D.C. park before the trial can even begin.
Yeah, well, the judge is going to not allow a lot of that evidence to be presented in the first place.
Well, it's going to be hard to justify that legally, but on the other hand, we've seen some bizarre stuff coming out of the courts, whether it's the liberal courts out there, fighting against Trump's travel restrictions and immigration law changes, or that judge down in Florida who threw out the RICO lawsuit against the Clinton Foundation without even looking at any of the evidence.
Or the judges in the Nevada case and the Oregon case.
Yes. It is a corrupt system.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. It is a corrupt system.
Terribly corrupt. Hey, thank you for talking with me.
You got it. Have yourself a really good day. Now then, Google and the tech giants are trying to shut down alternative free speech social sites. And apparently what Google and these other companies are doing, they're going into areas that have hate speech laws, and they're trying to cause trouble for these new up-and-coming censorship-free sites. And one of these is Gab. And this is a social media platform known as a free speech oasis. And they have now been ordered to transfer their Australian domain elsewhere or face a shutdown. Gab's domain registrar has given them 5 days to transfer the domain, or they will seize it. So Google and Facebook and all these other controlled, co-opted social media are trying to crush out any social media that is not on board with the propaganda directives. We're going to take another phone call here. Frank in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Off subject here, if there is a subject, but hey, have you ever heard this story about the actress Nicole Kidman's father? Any controversy, any kind of scandal?
Not that I'm aware of, but then I don't read the scandal sheets.
Okay. Well, I was listening to a radio show on RBN the other day, and the guy seemed like a very intelligent guy, British guy, but he just somehow, I forget how they even got on the subject. He threw out something about Nicole Kidman's dad, how he had been arrested in relation to, he was part of some group that hunted children, naked children. They would go out and hunt naked children, some pedophile group or something like that.
Yeah, that's a little out there. I have heard absolutely nothing about that, and if he got arrested for it, if he was really doing that and he got arrested for it, good. Okay, but on the other hand,
I think he died prior to the trial, but I think this was like back in the 1970s, actually.
Okay, well, it's a little bit out there. I mean, obviously Nicole herself turned out pretty good, so I don't know. But again, I've heard absolutely nothing about that whatsoever.
And it's interesting, though, that she would be the choice of Stanley Kubrick for the female lead, and with her husband or future husband or whatever it was at the time,
Tom Cruise,
Eyes Wide Shut, which I recently just saw for the first time. But,
yeah,
okay,
isn't that amazing? I mean, only Stanley Kubrick could have taken a movie full of totally naked, beautiful women, full frontal nudity, and made it a complete bore.
And then he died. He died right. Didn't he die even before the release?
No, you're confusing that with AI. Kubrick was working on AI, and he died, and then Spielberg took it over. And as far as I'm concerned, Kubrick's original ending would have been a lot better, but Spielberg just decided he was going to... I don't want to get into it. I disagreed with that decision, but then Spielberg doesn't listen to me anymore. Anyway, thanks for the phone call, Frank. We're going to let you go. And just do a search on that and see if anything turns up here. Oh, okay. All right, I'm not even going to bother with it. This is not we don't do celebrity entertainment news on this website. So, getting on back to the heavy-handed tactics of our social media. Apparently, according to a story that came out of the Daily Beast, Facebook is apparently censoring Rohingya reports of ethnic cleansing. Now, Facebook is supposed to be this organization committed to helping the world share their stories. But apparently people from Burma who are doing posts about what's being done to them, the stories keep vanishing. Little strange there. Back to the phones here. Murr in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I had the volume down when I was waiting to get through there a minute ago, and Frank was talking about Kubrick, I heard.
Yes.
But I think he was talking about Nicole Kidman. Was he talking about her father?
That was where he originally started, and something about apparently back in the 70s, supposedly he was arrested for some kind of pedophile crime, but I've never heard anything about it. But again, I don't follow the lives of the celebrities.
Right, but I could send you links. He definitely was. I thought that's maybe what that was. But what I called about was Hal Big's Twitter. It's just Hal Big W.
Yep.
And he has a documentary posted on there, but you have to sign in at YouTube to get to it. So,
okay.
But probably be worthwhile. I don't know. I never sign in for YouTube or Google or any of that. I avoid them as like the plague, actually, pretty much. You know, of course they're the corner of the market there.
Yeah, they're a monopoly. In fact, there have been a lot of people saying that lately that all of these, YouTube, Facebook, especially Google, ought to be broken up under the antitrust laws. They did it to the phone company. Why can't they do it to Google? Especially when you find that these companies are engaging in massive censorship and suppression of information on behalf of government and corporations.
Yes, yes. Another one, Serco, is deeply embedded in everything, and that's out of Britain. That needs to be broken up, SERCO.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I might have heard abledanger.org mentioned on your program. It's EL, not the LE version. The LE version was the Tony Schaefer out of the Pentagon.
Yes.
This is EL, as in Cain and Abel, and Field McConnell and David Hawkins doing an awful lot of work. You know, they have their opinions, and everyone's entitled to them. But I think we're seeing a little bit of a renaissance here of critical thinking that really Trump has kind of ushered in, you know, giving us some breathing room. Protocols number 10, part 20 says if we give them breathing room, we're not going to see what we want happen. So,
well, I would
but of course, they're not providing.
I would like to think that, you know, my work over the last 24 years, encouraging people to think for themselves, has something to do with that renaissance.
Yes, Blackbird, BB9, Frederick C. Blackburn, he's pretty busy most of the time now, but he was, you know, really lauding your praises, you know, how you, what is it, over a decade now, 5 shows a week, 3 hours a day, and that's almost continual. I mean, once in a great while you'll need to do something else. Heaven forbid you have a life.
Well, I do have a life. Much of it revolves around this work, and the rest revolves around my wife Claire and her choral work. But I started back with the other radio network 10 years ago. And it has been pretty much constant. At one point, I was doing 2 shows a day for 2 different networks, but I couldn't keep up that effort. And so I think there have only been a few weeks when I've been off the air. I mean, obviously during my my illness, I was off the air, and a couple of times. But yeah, it's been pretty steady and solid track record here.
Yeah, stay well. Oh, and who was that in Vancouver that you, Jim who?
Jim Goddard.
Jim Goddard, and you do that one a couple times a week, right?
And I do it once a week, regular as clockwork. I do a lot of radio interviews for a lot of other different people that I fit in and around in the gaps in the schedule here.
Yeah, I noticed that when I'm looking through things, I see your name pop up quite a bit.
I just did one for Reluctant Preppers, for example. Anyway, Mer, going to let you go. Thank you for the chat and for all the kind words here, but I want to get back to the real news because we're coming up to the end of the program. The first snow of the season has hit the Rocky Mountain National Park here. And again, we're into September. Still technically just on the doorway to autumn. But apparently there was enough snow that some of the roads were closed here. Now, of course, Al Gore is out there with his inconvenient sequel, which has been a box office bomb. And they're still out there pushing the human-caused global warming is the end of us all here. The reality is that the Earth is cooling. And, of course, all the carbon Nazis are out there pointing at all the hurricanes and saying, well, see, all those hurricanes, it proves the Earth is warming. And again, heat does not cause storms. A temperature differential causes storms. And you can get monster storms from upper atmosphere cooling as well as from oceans and ground warming. And again, the proof is out there in those outer gas giant planets where they have storms the size of our entire Earth at temperatures hundreds of degrees below zero. So coming on back to our planet here, the raw data before government agencies or corporate media messes around with it, the Arctic sea ice extent is up 40% from this date 5 years ago. That's an indicator. We are in a cooling trend. We're in a new Maunder minimum, despite the recent solar flares. Now, Greenland's Petermann Glacier is growing at 10 feet per day, and over the last 5 years has added 5 kilometers of ice. Remember when they were out there saying, oh, the glaciers, they're all vanishing. Co-founder of Greenpeace was on TV about 18 years ago predicting that Greenland would be completely ice-free in just 20 years. And we're almost up on that time, and Greenland actually has more ice than it had way back then. This guy actually got called on this by a TV interviewer, and he finally admitted, yeah, it was just a lie, but we need to motivate people, and so that makes it okay for us to use lies and deceptions to get them on board with our agenda of global warming as part of the New World Order. We'll be back after these last few commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today. We're going to take one more phone call from Amos in Maine. Amos, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Amos, are you?
Yeah, Mike.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, this guy that just called in previously about the St. Louis incident that was talking about the rifle.
Yes.
Well, this guy really was so convoluted and doesn't understand anything if he did read the article or watch it, because it says right in the article the AK-47 was the police officer's firearm that he had with him as well. So it was the police officers because he was an Iraqi war veteran and apparently he liked the AK-47, so he had one on duty with him. But this is how
that would make a lot more sense. That would make a lot more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just wanted to correct that for you because I think you're on the right track, and if anyone's going to get down to the bottom of it, I bet it's going to be you.
Well, I'll do my best. I'll do my best here. But in any event, it's almost irrelevant what actually happened between this police officer and this drug dealer. These riots are obviously being fanned up to support this whole Antifa, Black Lives Matter, oh, there's a racist crisis in this country. And I think they're doing it to basically take away from all those photos that we saw in the aftermath of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, where we had all these people of all different races, ethnic groups, blacks helping whites, whites helping blacks, and it just yanks the rug out from underneath this agenda to portray the American people as a racist society. Okay, so Amos, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go because we're running out of time here. Now then, apparently over in Germany, an energy expert, Dr. Detlef Alborn, is saying wind power has been a boondoggle for everybody who's tried it. And he's saying because there's inadequate storage, 25% of the wind energy that gets produced is waste energy. You can't use it. There's no demand for it. And it's one of those things that sounded like a really good idea to the environmentalists, and it's just never penciled out. It's been heavily subsidized, and it isn't producing. We have a wind farm down on the Big Island. It's been completely abandoned. It's just corroding away. We have one on the north part of Oahu. It's providing a tiny portion of Oahu's energy needs. But more often than not, it's sitting still. Believe it or not, if the wind blows too hard, they have to shut the windmills down, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but that's how they're designed. Now, a lot of people are concerned that the United States may experience a new Sputnik moment, and that's talking about the government and popular shock the United States felt when when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik into orbit. And all it was a marker. It was up there, and it had a transmitter, and it was just beeping away so that anybody with a shortwave receiver underneath the orbital path could hear it. Well, now we're looking at China starting to pull ahead in the space race. And we're going to have another Sputnik moment with them. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Meanwhile, stay tuned for John Stadmiller. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Meanwhile, I ask you to take what you learn here from the radio show and from the website, share it with everyone that you know. We have to push back against the lies with our tsunami of truth. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.